Good afternoon. I'm Debbi Marcum with Retirement Solutions Group, and I would love to welcome my co-host, the lovely Jaclyn Gladhill.
Aw, Debbie, well, thank you. I love doing the podcast with you and, retirement your way with the one and the only Debbi Marcum. So, I'm excited for this topic. Well, first, before we dive into this topic, though, I do want to hear about last week. So you took a work trip, and it was through Gradient, through the summit, is what the event was called. So tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about what you went through last week.
Summit is always one of my favorite events of the year, primarily because just the people at Gradient and the other agents that are across the United States are outstanding, and I get some of my best ideas from them. Um, They also love to hear my ideas, so we do some wonderful, sharing. They asked me to speak at the Women in Business breakfast, and I was able to talk about especially how to help everyone through grief. I've
Mhm.
walked the walk and have a T-shirt, and not only survive but learn how to be grateful for every single day. So hopefully, I can kind of pass those tips on to people.
Yeah, yeah, that is super cool. And I just want to go back and reiterate that you were asked to speak at the Women in Business. And, that is just who you are, Debbie, as a person. I mean, you are just eluding happiness, eluding advice and life experience. I mean, you're such a great speaker. You really connect with a lot of women and just people in general. I mean, people look at you, they have a conversation, and they just go away happier than they, came into it.
Oh, thank
So,
you.
yes,
Thank you.
I mean, that is super exciting, and it was in Scottsdale, Arizona, right?
Yes, at the beautiful Venetian. It was absolutely gorgeous. Had fantastic speakers. Um, just had a lovely time. And I come away with ways that I can help my clients on a regular basis. And I'm always grateful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a moment to connect with other people in the same profession, other financial advisors, and you guys truly, just talk about how to better your business. You learn from each other's mistakes. It's so much to learn, but through connection,
I
and
agree.
doing that with others. And so being surrounded by people makes you a better person, right? So when you're
Yes.
surrounded by people that are better or whatever, in the field, if you can even call it that, but experts, it makes you become better. So I love that.
I believe so. I think you need to surround yourself with the people that lift you up. And hopefully, in the process, you also lift them up. But they truly are the best in the business. And I follow several other advisors' podcasts as well and get some of my best advice on how to assist clients through them.
Yes, yes. And there's going to be a lot of new coming information. We're not going to spoil it, but a lot of new things are coming this year. And is in your business and how you practice, financial advising. So I'm excited to see how that turns out.
Mm.
Um, and we'll be working together through that. So that'll be
Yes.
exciting. And
I always look forward to this.
yes, yes, agreed. Well, Debbie, let's share with our listeners and viewers what we're going to be talking about today.
Well, this is also a topic that's near and dear to me, I guess in part because I did not do it correctly. And for example, a prior lawyer that my late husband and I, you know, used
Mhm.
actually suggested that we only needed a will and not a trust. And
Okay.
for us, that was not great advice. So I really do try to guide my clients through which is necessary for you, a will or a trust. And it's not the same for all. I also discovered that not every lawyer is giving the best advice for their
Mhm.
particular circumstances. So, I'd like to kind of delve into why do we need a will or a trust and what's the difference? Not only what is the difference between a will and a trust, but there are revocable and irrevocable trust. And so it's a lot more complex. And while I'm not a lawyer, I've been very fortunate to work with fantastic attorneys across the United States. And, you know, I can kind of advise them, yes, I'm going to suggest that you talk to a lawyer on this, or I can assist you with getting a will or a trust. So while I do not give legal advice, I can advise you. Okay, I need you to talk to someone about a will or a trust, and do you need a power of attorney, and how do we proceed best with that?
Mhm.
So today I'd kind of like to go into the difference of what is the difference between a will and a trust. That seems to be a good starting point for most
Mhm.
people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to, we'll start off with kind of the basics here, but both of these are used for estate planning. So they're
Yes.
used typically when you pass away, but they're set in place prior, before you pass away. And that's the important key, part to take away here.
Yes, it is.
And so Debbie, let's start with, a will. So let's
Yes.
start there. What is a will and why would some use it, or kind of just explain what it is?
Okay, great. Well, they are both intended to dictate how you want your assets distributed after you're gone. However,
Mhm.
there are some big differences. A will is especially important if you have minor children. Because it will do something that a trust will not do. And a will is where you designate who needs to become the guardian of your child if something happened to you. So a
Oh,
trust will not do that, but a will, will do that for you. A
will.
will, yes, it will. Um, a will is going to go through probate. So while wills are typically less expensive than trust, in the long run, it can be more expensive for the beneficiaries.
Mm.
Um, Now, the majority of trust include a pour over will. So, yeah, I think it's important, especially if you have children, that you not only have a will, but that you have a trust. In many states, the trust is null and void without the will. So it's kind of essential. So no matter who you go to, you need to make sure that a trust includes that pour over will. And a pour over will include any assets that are not included in the trust so that in your passing, they just get attached to the trust.
Mhm.
Um, but like I said, both are intended to dictate who gets what when you're gone. But there are some differences. The cost, and then especially if you have minor children, that will is essential so that you can dictate who is the guardian. You do not want the court to have to make that decision for you.
Okay. And so now we kind of have the basics of what a will is,
Yes.
and how it is different from a trust. But you kind of mentioned from your experience, you were given the recommendation to do a will, but you
Yes.
should have done a trust.
Yes.
So, what is a trust and why is that more important in your situation or from your experience?
Well, a trust is going to bypass probate. So at that point, once the probate process has started and they find out that you have a trust, a lawyer is not needed to actually kind of take you through that process. So therefore, there's not going to be a fee paid to that lawyer after the fact. They get paid when they do the trust, but not actually taking a portion of the proceeds as it goes through probate. So it can cost you a little bit more on the front end while you're still living, but it can be especially important for the beneficiaries, especially if you have significant assets. If you have, quite a few of my clients have homes in more than one state. It's
Mhm.
essential at that point that you have a trust because if you don't, then both states are going to go through probate. And
Mm.
having had to go through probate, that's just a painful experience you do not want to have to go through. It's a slower process and there can be court cost involved. So you want to avoid probate at all costs. So that's a big part of how I help my clients is avoiding probate. Plus,
Okay.
there are some things that people will want to put in a trust that don't need to go in a trust. So I kind of help guide them through all of that. And, we'll assist them with either one of those.
So, does anything come to mind when you say, people sometimes put things into the trust that shouldn't be in
Yes.
there? What comes to mind? What from your experience are examples?
Well, for thing, an IRA does not need to go into a trust because annuities do not need to go into a trust. They already bypass probate, so they serve the purpose of a trust. And but if you put things like an IRA or a retirement plan in, it can actually cause your beneficiaries to get less money, you know,
Mhm.
or fewer of the assets because it can change their taxable situation. So there are quite a few mistakes made with that. I've also discovered that not every lawyer actually gives the best advice. For example, just writing the trust and getting it notarized, which is not legal until it's notarized,
Mhm.
um, they will not tell them that they need to fund the trust, which is putting the asset in the trust. For example, putting your home title or the home mortgage
Mhm.
in the trust name, because if that's not done, it's going to go through probate. So knowing how to fund the trust and what to include in that is especially important. And I've just kind of discovered over the years that not every lawyer remembers to to tell their clients that.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there are significant differences between a will and a trust,
Yes.
but the idea behind them stays the same. You know, the
Yes.
idea of protecting all of your assets when you do pass. And there's different types of this. I mean, Debbie, you kind of mentioned it before a little bit with, minor children. But there's two different stories that I hear most are widowhood. So kind
Yes.
of Debbie, what you went through, but then there's also if you are the long standing or the lone standing parent and it passes to your children as beneficiaries.
Yes.
And those are kind of the two most common forms or when it's used. And so what other information can we share about wills and trusts? I mean, the purpose is to protect your assets, but why? Why a will and a trust?
Well, for one thing, you sometimes want to protect them from themselves. So,
Mm.
especially with a trust, you can set it up. For example, my grandchildren are still quite young. I'm not sure how responsible they're going to be financially, as they grow older. If I were to give them that money today, pretty sure it would quickly disappear out of their
Mhm.
pocket tomorrow. So, there are ways to protect. For example, if you have a spendthrift child, if they're going to spend the money very quickly
Mhm.
and not as wisely as you would like to, you can set it up so that it is done in a more appropriate way. For your grandchildren, you could set it up so that they could receive it when they're 18, or that the funds go toward college, or half when they're 25, half when they're 30. So those are way to protect minor children. It does not just have to apply to minor children. For example, if you have a son or a daughter who has experienced, you know, alcohol addiction or drug addiction or gambling addiction, you can actually put that in so that they have to be drug free for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. You can set that up to help protect themselves. Um, and that's sad that we have to do that. But if you truly want to pass your assets on to benefit them the most, I think that's a very wise way to do that.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree, and I know from my own experience, I have a friend of a friend that got a lump sum of money as soon as she turned 18, and it did not go well. It was a new car, it was a let's get a giant apartment, and move out, and it went very fast, and so that happens more often than people might think,
Yes, it does.
and so just putting that in place for kind of maybe it's just a typical how you handle it, right? I mean, you think that you might know your children and you might think, "Oh, my child would never do that. They're smarter than that." But in reality, you don't know what's going to happen. So putting those in place. And I think it's also important, Debbie, when do you think this conversation about wills and trusts should be had? I mean, should it be had later on or when somebody gets sick or right away, maybe when you get married?
I think it is take place before you get married, because one thing you may find that you have very differing opinions. That's one reason why I love the color of money that I do with my clients, so that especially for a couple, you get to go through those conversations, and it kind of guides you through a less painful way to do it. Of
Mhm.
okay, how do we feel about this? In all honesty, once you start becoming financially responsible, you need a medical power of attorney. You need a financial power of attorney, and you need either a will or a trust. Typically, younger ones can suffice with a will, which tends to be a little less expensive. And as you're trying to work your way up, but too many couples start off with a will and then forget to do a trust. So a good financial advisor is going to continue to go back and have those conversations with you in your annual meetings that you reviews that you have with them. So it's extremely important to go back and visit it. I will say that you can make changes to a will fairly easily as long as
Mhm.
you've got it documented and notarized. And with trust, you need to get with, you know, someone that's going to do your trust, that's not going to charge you for a brand new trust every time you make a change or an adjustment. Which you need to learn the difference between a revocable trust and an irrevocable trust, because there are very big differences in those two, and how complicated you want your life to be. And also, you have to be able to truly trust your trustee. It's named that for a very good reason. Um, so I advise my clients, talk to a lawyer about which one you need: a revocable trust, which you can make changes, or an irrevocable trust, which is more set in stone. And so you can change the trustee, you can change your beneficiaries, but you cannot change what you put into it. So it becomes much more complicated. One big difference that I'd like to point out as well: a trust does not only deal with once a death has occurred, because if an illness occurs or if you become incapable of handling your finances, the trustee of your trust can actually help handle that for you, which is extremely important, because we don't know what the future holds for us. We don't know if one day we, may be in a wreck and, in a temporary coma and incapable of making those decisions. And a trustee can help with that. They can't just clean you out. There are protections in there to keep that from happening. But I think it's important to have those things set up. But you there rarely is a case when it's too soon to have a will or a trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point right there, Debbie, is some illnesses like Alzheimer's, dementia, having a stroke, all of those things can prevent you from making your own choices, and your power of attorney would, you know, take care of your finances and take over for your finances. So those are kind of just examples of what you are talking about. And I think, you're right. As soon as you can is what's important here, because there you don't we wish that we had a crystal ball, but we don't. We don't know when we're going to pass. And all of, whoever we have, like my parents, for instance, my parents are still around. They would have no idea where I would want things to go. So, Debbie, anything else that we want to add to today's episode?
Oh, gracious. There may not be enough hours in the day to cover everything to go get to. However, I will just say, I'm a big believer in making things as easy as possible for the people that you have in your life, because losing a loved one is difficult enough as it is. And so having those things set up in place beforehand, and having those difficult discussions before, you know, something awful happens, is very important. And just go ahead and have those difficult discussions. We mentioned about having the financial power of attorney, but it's equally as important to have the healthcare power of attorney. There are some states where hospitals will not even discuss, you know, the spouse's health with them without the healthcare power of attorney. And you do not want someone in the hospital making that decision for you. You also want to have it set up so that it doesn't create conflict in your family down the road. I personally know of at least two families where the siblings no longer speak to each other because their mother or father did not have the healthcare power of attorney, did not have the living will set up. And one daughter was like, Mom was a fighter. She would want to, fight this until her last breath. And the other daughter was like, nope, she would not want to live like this. And then they no longer speak to each other because they made that decision, and one did not agree with the other. So go ahead and have those difficult discussions with you. A good financial advisor can be there to guide you through those difficult questions. And, they can ask the complicated questions that your spouse may be too afraid to ask for, fear of offending your spouse. So have those difficult discussions now, so that it paves the way and makes that difficult journey easier for your loved ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, I think that the key takeaways here are we want to avoid probate at all costs. That is court, just, it's just a waste of time, a waste of money. When we can avoid it, that's what we want to do. And so that's number one. And then number two is, a will and a trust, there's a lot of emotion behind it. It's one of
Yes.
the most emotional, paperwork that you do, and as well as for your family afterwards, right? It's just an emotional time, and we discussed that last week as well with our episode. And um, we really want to keep the family together. And
Right.
we've heard story after story of families being broken apart by these documents. And that's not what your parents would want. That's not what your husband or wife would want, or, your partner. You We want to keep everyone together. And
Right.
so I think, one thing that I said to my parents, because I actually signed my parents' will when they did it, and I told them, I said, well, my brother and I both, we were like, we want everything to be written out in your will and your trust. We said, we don't want to have conversations. We don't want to argue. I mean, that was just our wishes. Like, just have everything written out. We don't care, but then it just leads to less discussion, less arguments. Um, and yeah. So, anyways, Debbi, can you share with our listeners before we close today how they can contact you?
Yes, the best way would be to email me. That is the easiest way to email me at debbi@rsgagents.org, or you can contact my office at Retirement Solutions Group, and Andy can set up a visit with us. I look forward to meeting with as many of you that would like to meet with me and make it as easy as possible. I also, when you mentioned probate, an important part of that is probate keeps it private. And if it goes through probate, suddenly all of your information, all of your financial information is public knowledge. And that can put your beneficiaries at risk. So I think that's an important,
For sure.
mention.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you did. Well, thank you, viewers and listeners, for watching us. And don't forget that you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Music, Amazon Music, and YouTube. We're on all four of those. So if you want to see our beautiful faces, go ahead and check out the YouTube. And if not, you can just listen to our voices as well. And then if you subscribe, you can be notified when new episodes are out. And hopefully we will see you guys next week. So Debbi, that does it for this episode of Retirement Your Way with our host, Debbi Marcum.
Thank you very much.